Rebecca Solnit, in our reading today, noted that hope is to accept despair as an emotion, but not as an analysis. To hope is to accept despair as an emotion, but not as an analysis. To recognize, she goes on, that what is unlikely is possible just as what is likely is not inevitable. I'll say that all again. There's a lot of words. Hope is to accept despair as an emotion, but not as an analysis. To recognize that what is unlikely is possible, just as what is likely is not inevitable. What is likely is not inevitable. Now, I was talking to an artist friend of mine this week, and I told them what the topic of today's service was: the environment and despair. And he told me that he sees his role in the environmental movement as one of witness. Witness. Painting and drawing scenes in nature, often in the same locations day after day. But each time the scene is different. Sometimes there's rain. At other times there's sun. It used to be snow. And over an extended period of time, a story appears that tells us of the place and the planet, the ecosystem, its joys, its stresses, and its sorrows. Now, Henry David Thoreau was a witness too. Back then, just as the Industrial Revolution was kicking off in Concord, he would note the date that certain plants bloomed around Walden Pond every year, along with the ice-out date. The ice-out date when the pond was no longer covered in ice. This practice of witnessing continues today, and the Park Service can tell us that the ice melts on Walden Pond at least 2 weeks earlier now than it did back then. And we have been witnesses. During hikes in the White Mountains this past spring and summer, many people in the hiking community have noticed the haze from the Canadian wildfires that have obscured the view. And of course, the weird weather of climate change. From hiking through the snow on Mount Hale in June to the constant and unremitting flood of Vermont and New Hampshire in the spring. All this tells us that something is wrong with the ecosystem. Now, you have similar experiences, I know, because we've talked about them. We have all seen the state of the world because we live in it. We are part of it. And that is what it means to be a witness. And that is what it means to witness. That is what it means to witness as well. I don't know about you, but there are days when I feel driven to despair. We have witnessed so much over the last decade in so many aspects of our lives that the state of the world can leave us with dark feelings about the future. Now, in part, this is a function of the time we live in. But partly, it's by design. Partly, it is by design. Solnit says that a lot of stories in circulation endeavor to strip us of hope and power, to tell us that it doesn't matter, or it is too late, or there is nothing we can do, or we can never win. This is an old tactic of the powers, of those secular forces that try to profit off of feelings of helplessness. They want us to despair over the state of the world. They want that hopelessness because sad people and depressed societies are easier to control. They have no energy to advocate for themselves. They accept their weakness with fatality. But it doesn't have to be that way. We have the choice to see all that is going wrong And instead of throwing up our hands in surrender, we can choose to be energized. We can choose action. We can choose to take our witness and move into the world. The reading from Solent today came from a book she co-edited about the climate crisis. I have it right here. It's entitled, Not Too Late, Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility. Changing the climate story from despair to possibility. In a way, it is written for and in honor of a new generation of activists, energized by the Green New Deal, who have sometimes been told, frequently been told, that the fight was lost before they were born. Now, I wouldn't say that it is a cheerful book, but I would say that it does help to beat back despair. Even for those of us who have been around for a while and may have become a bit jaded. While there are some things about this moment that feel unique, says Yotam Moran in our reading today, I remind myself that the experience of the world ending is not new. The experience of the world ending is not new. We know this to be true. It's new to us, but we know that it is true, that over the course of humanity, each time we seem to be losing, despair rears its head, and we are tempted to throw in the towel. Ram himself has quite a list in his essay. In it, he mentions the devastation on Easter Island, the fall of Carthage, the arrival of Columbus, the rise of chattel slavery, the Holocaust, the destruction of Hiroshima, the Cold War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. We could add more. More moments where it felt as though the world was ending. But over the course of that same human history, we, human beings, have fought back against the despair. Instead, some people realize that surrender is not the only option. Instead, we work against the odds to find ways to bridge the gap between the darkness of today and the bright future that is possible tomorrow. Frederick Douglass once observed that power concedes nothing without a demand, and we can still make those demands for as long as we have breath. We can still witness. We can choose to speak and act. And we should be encouraged that even though it may not feel like it and progress is slow, we should be encouraged that we are actually moving in the right direction. For the environment, at least. Finally. Now, as we've talked about in previous parts of this series, things have gotten pretty bad. They got really bad in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So bad, in fact, that it has taken an enormous amount of time to work our way back to where we are today. After all, we have had to do more than repair the damage to the planet. We have had to challenge a culture and an economic system that encourages exploitation and extraction, not just of the ecosystem, but of the people who live in it. Exploitation and extraction. Now, there's a phrase attributed to Theodore Parker, Martin Luther King, and a handful of others that is designed for times like this. Some of you know. It says that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And it is helpful, I think, that this book has a few fairly extensive lists of the many victories along that arc. Each victory has a story of struggle and sacrifice. Movements need people. They need activists. They need witnesses and witnessing, and humanity over history has indeed stepped up. Or at least part of humanity. Enough people, enough human beings have stepped up. And this is where we, the church, and other gathered voluntary communities can help. Ram asks in his reading today, what do we do when the world is ending? What do we do when the world is ending? And he answers, the same things that so many of the giants on whose shoulders we stand did when their worlds were ending. We choose to face our despair, to walk toward it and through it, choose to take action, choose to build movements. Now, as I have mentioned in the past, we in the church always have the option to hope. We always have the option to hope. We always have the choice to plant a seed for the commonwealth of heaven. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus describes this sort of choice as a mustard seed. As we have observed before, he uses a lot of nature imagery because he and his followers live very close to nature. So he talks about this mustard seed that someone took and sowed in the field. It is the smallest of seeds, he says, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air can make a nest in its branches. Now, I mentioned on annual meeting Sunday, some of you were there, that congregations today need to think of themselves not as builders, but as farmers and gardeners. Not as builders, but as farmers and gardeners, tilling the earth and planting the seeds in the ruins of past forms and institutions. And this field of environmental justice is a place that could use some mustard seeds. As Solnit notes, perhaps it's not hope, but faith that sustains people when success looks almost inconceivable. Perhaps not hope, but faith that sustains people when success looks almost inconceivable. There are many fields that need planting. There are many ways that we can plant. And since hope and faith are both the business of the church, we should take a moment now to consider what we can do, how we can plant these seeds to grow and support not just our own work, but the work of others who are tempted to despair.